You think Trump woke up one day and decided Greenland sounded fun? You think Denmark's scrambling emergency EU meetings because of hurt feelings? Wake up. This isn't about real estate. This isn't about ego. This isn't even about Greenland. This is about the Arctic Circle becoming the most valuable theater on Earth, and the United States realizing it's late to the party. While you were scrolling TikTok, Russia militarized the Northern Sea route. China declared itself a near-Arctic state, despite being 900 miles away, and Greenland controls access routes that cut 40% off Asia-Europe shipping and hosts the only deep water port between Canada and Norway. So here's your choice. Do you think Trump's bluffing? Or do you think he knows exactly what century we're in? Greenland has 57,000 people. It also has Thule Air Base, the U.S. military's northernmost installation, critical for ballistic missile early warning and satellite tracking. Rare earth deposits that could break China's 70% monopoly on the minerals that run your phone, your your military drones. The Northwest Passage, which is now ice-free 4 months a year thanks to climate change, turning it into a superhighway Russia and China are already exploiting. Denmark contributes $600 million a year to Greenland's budget. That's it. Greenland runs a deficit. It's not sovereignty, it's a subsidy with a flag. Now Trump floats annexation. EU meets in emergency session. Lawmakers publicly contradict him. Greenlanders march in the streets. But nobody's talking about what happens if the US just writes a bigger check. Because that's the actual play. This isn't invasion, it's auction. Let's be clear. Denmark has no ability to project military power in the Arctic. None. They have 15,000 active duty personnel total. Their navy has 4 frigates, their air force F-16s designed for European skies, not Arctic expeditionary ops. Meanwhile, Russia has 40 icebreakers. The US has 2. China's building its 5th. China is investing billions in Arctic infrastructure through Iceland and Greenland mining partnerships. NATO has no unified Arctic strategy because half its members don't even border it. Denmark knows this. Because if Greenland flips, the entire European northern flank gets redrawn. And here's what nobody's saying out loud. Greenland's population is Inuit, not Danish. They already have autonomy. They already hold independence referendums every few years. They already resent Copenhagen for centuries of colonial control. So what happens when Washington offers Greenland $5 billion a year? Denmark can't counterbid. The EU might. But then you're talking about turning Greenland into a ward of Brussels, which Greenlanders will love, I'm sure, because Greenland isn't happening in a vacuum. Look at the timeline. Iran's supreme leader admits thousands died in protests, meaning the regime is either collapsing or preparing a crackdown so brutal it needs preemptive messaging. Crackdowns Trump's tariff threats are forcing emergency EU meetings while European defense budgets are tapped out from Ukraine. You see the pattern? The US is stress testing every alliance, every assumption, every red line at the same time. Trump isn't picking one fight. Greenland forces Europe to choose. Do they back Denmark in a territorial dispute with the US, their primary security guarantor? If they fold, European sovereignty becomes a joke. If they resist, Trump has justification to pull back from NATO commitments, leave Europe exposed to Russia, and refocus entirely on the Pacific. You think Beijing isn't absolutely thrilled watching this? The US picking a fight with Denmark, a NATO ally, over Arctic territory gives China diplomatic cover to do exactly the same thing in the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and eventually Taiwan. Oh, you're annexing Greenland? Cool. We're annexing the Spratlys. What's the difference? And they'd be right. Worse, if Greenland becomes a US state or territory, it sets a modern precedent for territorial acquisition through economic coercion. That's the playbook China's been running in Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific for 20 years. Trump just made it official use policy. Now imagine. Russia uses the same logic in Kazakhstan or Belarus. China uses it in the Solomon Islands or Sri Lanka. India uses it in Bhutan. Territorial sovereignty just became transactional. And the country that wrote the post-World War II rules against conquest? That's us. We just tore up the book. So why is nobody stopping this? Because nobody can. The US economy is 10x Denmark's. Our military is 50x theirs. Greenland's GDP is $3 billion. We lose that in Pentagon accounting errors. The EU could theoretically intervene, but Germany's in recession, France is dealing with domestic chaos, Poland and the Baltics care more about Russian tanks than Arctic shipping lanes. There's no coalition that can counterbid the United States without triggering an internal EU crisis. And Greenland? They're not pro-Denmark. They're not pro-independence in a vacuum. They're pro-whoever pays the bills and doesn't treat them like a colony. Right now, that's nobody. So Trump's offering. And if you think Greenlanders marching in the streets changes that, protests don't pay for hospitals. Marshes don't build airports. Sovereignty doesn't mean anything if you're bankrupt. Here's the question nobody wants to answer. If Greenland says yes, what happens to NATO? If the US absorbs a European territory, does that make us a North Atlantic power or a colonial one? Does Britain get to reclaim the Falklands permanently? Does France get to fully integrate French Guiana without pushback? Does Turkey get to solidify control over northern Cyprus? Or does the entire international order based on territorial integrity just collapse? Because that's the actual endgame here. Trump isn't trying to buy Greenland for the minerals. He's redrawing the map to prove the map is fiction. Borders aren't real. Sovereignty isn't real. International law isn't real. Power is real. Money is real. And leverage is the only vote that counts. You think it's a coincidence that Khamenei admits to killing thousands of protesters right now? Because Iran sees the same thing China does. America is distracted, overstretched, and testing its own alliances. If the US is picking fights with Denmark, how much bandwidth does Washington have left for the Middle East? For the Strait of Hormuz? For a renewed nuclear breakout? Zero. Trump just told every adversary on the planet, I care more about Greenland than your region. That's not weakness, that's ruthless prioritization. But it also means Iran can escalate, China can move on Taiwan, Russia can push further into Ukraine. Because the United States is now fighting a war with its own allies over the Arctic. Greenland becomes a flashpoint. The EU either backs Denmark and fractures NATO or folds and admits their vassals. China takes notes and applies the same logic to Taiwan. Russia accelerates in the Arctic while the US is busy annexing. And Iran, already killing thousands, watches the US abandon the Middle East for the frozen north. The board is resetting. And you still think this is about an island? The real danger isn't whether Trump gets Greenland. It's that this works. If Greenland folds, if Denmark capitulates, if the EU blinks, then every frozen conflict, every disputed territory, every autonomous region on Earth just became fair game, and the country that wrote the rules, we just proved they were never real. So ask yourself, what happens when everyone starts playing by the new rules?